Joining me now is Eddie Glaude, Distinguished Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. He's the author of several books, including Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own, and We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For. Professor Glaude, good to see you. I thought of you when I wanted to discuss this because it so deeply troubled me that we were talking about protest and dissent, which is so core to this country, as hate.
You know, Ali, it's great to see you this morning. You know, I think your monologue there was so perfect, so spot on. And in so many ways, what you described was the divided soul of America. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois attributed double consciousness to Black Americans, that we see ourselves through the eyes of those who despise us. But in so many ways, that double consciousness is a consequence, a reflection, an impact, an effect of the double consciousness of the nation. America imagines itself at once as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. And that divided soul has produced a kind of madness at the heart of the country. So when I hear Mike Johnson say or describe the No King's March as they hate America rally, I hear him saying they hate us. Mm-hmm. I hear him invoking a notion of America that doesn't really include me, that views the white people who participated in those marches, the 7 million plus people, as somehow traitors in some ways, because they hold a vision of the country that actually runs counter to the way in which Douglass read the Declaration into the Constitution. And so part of what we have to do is to understand as clearly as we can this divided soul. You articulated a vision of the country, Ali, that was rooted in these ideals, these principles. Mike Johnson has a view of the country that's rooted in blood and soil, that can be traced to the calamitous decision to reconcile the principles of liberty with the institution of slavery. And we have to begin to untangle this, because the country that Mike Johnson loves, I do not love. The country we aspire to be is the country I'm willing to bank my all on. And I think we have to begin to unpack that as best we can, my friend.
This is very reminiscent, though, of the civil rights movement, in which people were both accused of being terrorists and communists and people who were hateful. And that's why I brought up the James Baldwin conversation. James Baldwin was deeply critical of America's flaws, and America is better for it.
Oh, of course, Ali, but there's nothing we can do to convince these folk that we are, in fact, patriots. Think about it. Over the course, I'm just thinking about my own tradition, my friend. Think about all of those folk who thought if only that we risk our lives for the country in war, we can demonstrate our loyalty, our fealty. And then they would return with their uniforms on and be lynched. What I'm trying to suggest here is that there's, to claim the banner of patriotism, right, we'll only do a certain kind of work. We won't convince those folk that we are genuinely American, because they have an idea of the country that runs absolutely counter to the idea that we're arguing for, to what the principles we're embracing. And so I understand the language of more perfect union. I understand the language that dissent is in so many ways the highest expression of patriotism. But when you're speaking to people who believe that people like me should shut up and be grateful, and I'm echoing in so many ways the language of J.D. Vance, I don't know if that's going to convince them. What I think we need to do is just simply embrace express our values, my friends, in such a way that evidence of deep, abiding love for everyday, ordinary people. And that, to me, is as American as we could possibly be, my friend.
Well, I often introduce you with one or another of your books, but I wanted to do both because it's important to people to read your James Baldwin book, but it's important for people to read your more recent book, We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For, in which you write, democracy requires a richly textured democratic culture close to the ground. What is needed, required even, under such conditions are innovative and creative ways of revitalizing local communities and fostering the development of multiple publics where citizens can engage in debate and deliberation together. This feels very, very of the moment, what you'd written there.
Yeah, to me, love of country is an abstraction. When we talk about love of country, it's a shorthand for that love close to the ground. Why we call this place home. And we call this place home not because of abstract ideas, but because our people are buried in the ground here. Because the folk who loved us, who make us who we are here. because we have, in so many ways, a relationship with everyday ordinary folk who are in our communities and beyond, right? That in some ways affirm the values that define how we understand ourselves. So we can play games with the abstraction, but when we look at the policies and how they affect people close to the ground, we can ask the question, really? Do you really love everyday ordinary folk? And if the country is going to be saved, Allie, it's going to happen close to the ground. 7 million plus folk gathered yesterday. That's just the beginning.
Yep.
We are the salvation this country needs, my friend. We are.
Eddie, I thank you for all the work that you've done to set the table for the discussion that all Americans need to have right now. Eddie Glaude is a distinguished professor of African American studies at Princeton University. He's the author of several books, including Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its Urgent Lessons for Our Own, and We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For.